Okay, so shalom everyone, good evening. It's a pleasure to meet you. Thank you so much for being here. I'm very happy to be here again. So tonight we're going to talk about this week's Parsha, which is Parashat Re'eh. Re'eh means see, to see. Before we start, I just want to dedicate this shiur to the late Tzaddik, Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz, who passed away on Friday. He was truly one of the greatest figures, rabbis in our generation, without a doubt, without question. Also, for me personally, one of the main figures in my own journey into Judaism, into the Torah world. As I was starting out, I was very secular, very anti-religious, very skeptical. And his books and also his character, meeting him, had several meetings and conversations with him, were extremely meaningful for me. And his books opened up Kabbalah for me, opened up Hasidus, opened up the Gemara, the Talmud, and just an incredible figure. I had the privilege of, the kind of privilege you could say, of being in his funeral. It wasn't a very big funeral because of the COVID virus, but I was at his funeral on Friday. It was very beautiful and moving. And there was no hespedim, there was no eulogies, because it was just before Shabbat, but there were amazing, beautiful songs sung at his graveside. And so, and also this particular shiur, I was inspired by by his book on the weekly Parsha, so I picked it up today to see what he has to say about Parashat Re'eh, and that sort of sparked off what we're going to do tonight. So mostly I'm a student of Rabbi Ginzburg, as you all know, but he was definitely, Rabbi Steinsaltz, someone who opened up, the gateway for me in many, many ways before discovering Rabbi Ginzburg. So really they're like two parent figures, you could say. Okay, so as I said, Parashat Re'eh, the word Re'eh means see. It's the root of the verb to see. So it has to do with eyesight, vision, looking, seeing, watching, and understanding what we're seeing. And that's the name of the parsha is always very important to understanding what it's all about. What is it about? What is the main thing we see across this parsha? It's a lot of details, but much of it has to do with the prohibition and the warning not to be seduced by the many practices of idol worship in the land of Israel. All of the book of Devarim, the fifth book of Moses, the book of Deuteronomy, is said by Moses upon entering the land, or just before entering the land, because of course Moses himself didn't enter the land, but it's several speeches he made in the final year, in the 40th year of the desert, and it's all in preparation for coming into the land of Israel. So some of it is summing up all the things that happened ever since the Exodus. And the other aspect of Deuteronomy is preparation for entering the land of Israel. It's the past and the future, and he's preparing us. And in this particular parsha, the emphasis is on warning us that we should not be seduced by the practices and altars and idols and habits and also intermarriage with the inhabitants, the current inhabitants of the land of Israel, which are the 7 idolatrous nations. And a lot of stress is put on destroying their altars, breaking them, and cutting off the trees that they used to worship, and make sure that, and uproot it completely, make sure there's nothing left, because if you leave something, and of course we have to understand what this means, but if you leave something, there's a danger. Also, the peoples themselves, they have to either leave, or you have to make war against them, and then they shouldn't be. None of them should stay. Only later on can you accept what is called ger toshav, which is a non-Jew who believes, who accepts the faith in the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and in the Torah, and doesn't have to convert necessarily, but he can stay in the land of Israel. But that's after you clean it from idolatry, and if a people want to stay, they have to accept it they accept you as the ruler. And so it's very harsh, and it's very powerful, the commandments to make sure nothing is left from this idolatrous world. So the question is, what does this have to do with eyesight? So we have two themes here. One theme is that it's coming from the name of the parasha in the first verse, which is see, I give to you blessings and curses, and then all the other things that are mentioned in the parsha. And then the other thing we have is this, the warning of the negative influence and the seduction, the power, the seductive power of idolatry, and how much we should be careful of it or watch out for it. Right? Watch out is also the English term to watch out has to do with seeing. You have to watch out. So, but of course, we need to find a deeper connection between idolatry and vision or eyesight, the sense of sight. Now, it's also interesting because in the previous parasha, which was Parashat Ekev, last week we didn't speak about it, we spoke about Tu B'Av, 15th day of Av, but the previous parasha had a lot to say about hearing. So this parasha has to do with eyesight, but the previous parasha began, well, it says Ekev, it's a different name, but it says, Vaya Ekev Tishme'un. The one word after Ekev was, you shall hear. Because you shall hear, or as a consequence of your hearing. So on the very first verse, you had hearing. So it's very interesting. The previous parasha began with hearing. This parasha begins with seeing. But then it went on about hearing several times across the previous parasha. There was the Shema Israel, right? Hear, O Israel. Our main verse that encapsulates our faith was in that parsha. Also, Ve'aya im shamoa tishmeun. And you had several elements that had to do with hearing. So we have a transition here from the previous parsha to this parsha, from hearing to seeing. So we have to figure out what this means. Now, what makes it even more interesting is that we know from the Sefer Yetzirah, the book of formation, which is the first Kabbalistic book ascribed to Avraham Avinu, no less, that the 12 months of the year correspond to what Sefer Yetzirah calls the 12 senses. It's not really a sense as in the regular 5 senses we talk about. It's more like faculties. It's sense in the sense of the sense for music or sense of humor, something that enables you to express yourself more than to perceive the world. But within these 12 senses that correspond to the 12 months, starting with Nisan and going all the way around to Adar, Nisan being the first month, Adar being the 12th. So the 12 senses include the 5 regular senses, but in a different way. So it's seeing, but it's not passive seeing. There's active seeing, and there's also hearing, and there's also touch and taste and smell. But and sorry, 7 more, right? Because there are 12 senses. Now we're not going to go into all these senses, but we should know that, as I just said, we moved from Ekev to Re'eh, we moved from hearing to seeing. But if you look at the month we're now in, the month of Av, which sense or faculty corresponds to Av? It's the sense of hearing. And the previous month, Tammuz, was associated with the sense of seeing. So it's the opposite order. If we're looking at the months, we started with seeing, and then we moved, or we advanced, because we want to advance across the timeline, right? Across the year. We want to feel that we're advancing. So we sort of moved up from the seeing of Tammuz to the hearing of Av, which suggests that hearing is superior to seeing. On the other hand, if you look at this parashot, the previous parasha was Parashat Re'eh, and now we're advancing. The previous parasha was Ekev, which talked about hearing, and now we're advancing towards seeing. And in this particular parasha, because we're still in the month of Av, but this parasha is Re'eh, we really have a combination. On the level of the month, it's about hearing. But on the level of the parsha, we are now in the seeing element or seeing mindset. So this is very interesting in and of itself. So that if you look at the months, then Tammuz has to do with eyesight, and then we move to Av, which is hearing. But if you look at the particular parshat within Av, first you start with hearing, then you move to eyesight. By the way, we should say that it's not just the 12 months and the 12 senses, it's also the 12 tribes. And the tribes associated with Tammuz and Av, respectively, are, and this is the clearest connection between the tribe and the sense, is that the tribe of Tammuz is Reuven, which means seeing. Leah called him Reuven because she saw. She had a son, it was her first son. And then Av corresponds to the tribe of Simeon. So Simeon has to do with hearing. So it's mamish beautiful that it's Reuven has to do with seeing, that was Tammuz, and now Shimon has to do with hearing. Okay, so but what does all this mean? And particularly, what is the connection between the seeing of this parsha and the prohibition to watch out for the seductive power of idolatry? So we can begin the explanation in this way. We can say that when you think about it, from what we know about the world of idolatry, their altars and their temples and their statues and the kind of ceremonies they held. So obviously it involves all the senses, because there was incense which captivated the sense of smell, and there was music, and everything was there. But the primary element, we can say, the primary sense was the sense of vision, of eyesight. It was an extremely visual world. The world of idolatry was extremely visual. And the clearest way we can see this is that the statues had faces. They had faces. There were actual figures you could paint, or you can make a statue of them, and it immediately captivates your vision. It was beautiful statues and faces you could relate to. If today you're going to a country which still practices idolatry, like India or much of Asia, you can see this very clearly, because everywhere you go, you can see the statues, and it's very different, a very different experience from entering a synagogue, or lahavdil, entering a mosque, which, right, the Catholics also have a lot of pictures and statues, but the mosques and also Protestant churches, and of course synagogues, because that was the origin of Islam and of Protestant Christianity, negating images, is a very different experience than going into a place that has this visual richness. So when you go into the temple of idolatry, it captivates you visually extremely powerfully. The statues with their faces, the actual design of the temples. And when you think about what could correspond to this today, because the Torah is eternal, of course, and it has to, every commandment and every idea has to apply to each generation. So when you think about Parashat Re'eh in our generation, what would be the equivalent of this idolatry world with its altars and temples and statues and all this that captivates you, and that the Torah is very, very clear about shunning it and negating it and being extremely careful of it, and making sure you're absolutely free of its lure, because if you're not absolutely free, it'll catch you and captivate you and pull you in. I think the best equivalent today is that today we're again in an extremely visual world, ever since the invention of electronic media. So first it was radio waves, and it was just radio. That was all hearing. But once they invented television and the movie theater, and now the internet, and everyone walking around with a screen in their hands, and the world has once again become predominantly visual. And young children today, as we all know, find it very, very hard to concentrate on reading a book, because they just like to see movies, and they want to learn something, they go watch a YouTube video. And the screens everywhere, which are becoming bigger and bigger on the one hand, and smaller in the sense that they're compact and you're walking around with them on the other hand. So it's everywhere. It's like or makif and or pnimi, it surrounds you and it's in your grasp. all this is making the world now an extremely visual place, and the culture an extremely visual culture. It's very interesting, by the way, that the Hebrew word for culture, tarbut, appears in the Tanakh only once, in connection with the 12 spies, which were also lured by the external aspects, the way the land of Israel seemed to them. They seemed to be very small, and the inhabitants seemed to be giants, and they did the prohibition of lo taturu acharei levavchem ve'acharei einechem asher atem zonim acharem. Don't follow your eyes because they deceive you. And then it says tarbut anashim ra'im. So the word tarbut, culture in itself, of course, there's also very good culture, but the root of the word culture is associated with vision and with the negative kind of vision. So in our world today, you can say that the equivalent of the ancient elders is really the cinema house, going to a movie, the movie theater. The movie theater is the new idolatry altar or temple. And it's actually like a temple. It's built it's very massive. And you go there and the screen goes dark, the room goes dark, and you get lost into the movie. And now it's when people are staying at home, they have their own private movie theater in their home because the screen is so big, and they have all the equipment, and there's Netflix and whatever. All these things are the modern type of visual temptations that lure you into a kind of world in which there's only what you can see, right? What is so negative about this kind of vision or eyesight or visual culture? What's negative about it is because it gives you the false impression that what you see is what you get. And there's nothing beyond the physical. Really what it does is it entrenches you in the physical realm. You're left in the realm of the body, the realm of appearances, the realm of external impressions, and it seduces you to believe there's nothing beyond that. And the fact that we're overwhelmed by movies and TV series and endless stream, right? It's called streaming, right? When you're watching a video through the internet, it's an endless stream of images that their ultimate goal, we can say, not that there's a conspiracy or something, it's people want to make money, it's business. But the ultimate goal of the way it works is that it's supposed to keep you staring at the screen potentially forever, never leave the screen. And you're bored by this, let's give you something else. And you can zap through the channels and you can zap through the websites. And it's a constant seduction to get lost in the images and not to go beyond what you see to the inner, more spiritual aspects of things. And when we spoke about Tammuz the previous month, we said that it has to do with a sense of eyesight. And now we're advancing towards hearing. So in a minute, I'll say what hearing is. But the Tammuz, the name Tammuz, right? All the names of the months came really from Babylonia. And they were in a way converted by the rabbis, by the sages. Tammuz, the name Tammuz is an actual idol worshipping, it's an actual idol. It's an idol that had a particular method of service. And what they did in the Tammuz ritual was that it was a statue of a beautiful young man. And what they did, it was a tragic story that he died when he was young. There are many stories in world mythologies about beautiful young gods that die prematurely. And what they did was that they put pieces of lead in the eyes, and they would heat the statue from the inside, and that would cause the lead to melt, and it would appear that the statue was crying. It's ancient special effects. Before Hollywood and before the spectacle of the contemporary movie, it was this extremely emotional experience of looking at the statue that appeared to be crying. And I'm sure people knew it was fake, but just like when people go to the movies, they know it's fake, but still their it's like a very it's a tear jerker. It's the first tear jerker. It was this such a strong effect that you couldn't help yourself but cry. And Jewish women were also attracted by it. It attracted especially women. And Jewish women were also attracted by this. So, and so this is an amazing example of how idolatry used the sense of eyesight to captivate. It was the eyes of the statue, and the eyes appeared to cry, and this image, this visual image, would hypnotize you in a kind of way. Now, moving from Tammuz to Av, right? Tammuz is about eyesight, and it has to do with the idolatry world because it's called Tammuz after a very particular idol that used the sense of eyesight in a very manipulative way. Advancing from Tammuz to Av means advancing from looking at things to hearing things. And when you think about it in this way, and hearing is more internal than seeing. And in the simplest of ways, when we say don't judge a book by its cover, we meet a person, they make an impression on us because of the way they seem and what they remind us of and how they look like and if they're pretty or not pretty or whatever. But we all know that you shouldn't judge a book by its cover. If you do, you're a very shallow person, very superficial. And if you want to really know this person, you have to start listening to him. You have to have a conversation with him. And when they start speaking, you hear their voice. Their voice conveys their inner world. And then you get to know them. So seeing them is seeing their outside, and hearing them is hearing their inside. So when you think about the world of idolatry, which is all about eyesight, the Torah coming, entering the world, during a time that it's governed by idolatry, is in a way God telling us, I want you to elevate yourself. I want you to advance from a visual culture to a culture of hearing, a culture of texts, a culture of words, a culture of meaning. In Hebrew, meaning and hearing come from the same root. Lishmoa, that's to hear, and the mashma'ut is meaning. Mashma'ut is what you hear on the inside. If you just see the outside, you don't get the meaning of something. The meaning is what you hear when you listen to the inside of things. So the Torah doesn't have visual idols. You can't, it's prohibited. It's one of the most important prohibitions there is to make a painting or a statue of God. Because the whole point is that Abraham broke the idols. And just as we're commanded in this Parsha to break the different idols, because the idols tempt us to look at the world only through a visual lens, and the Torah wants to be a realm of meaning, a realm of hearing, and it tells us if you want to go beyond the superficial, beyond the material, into the spiritual, just like a person, if you want to get to know them, you have to have a conversation with them and hear them out, hear their voice, and then you know what they're about. You're not stereotyping them or trying to put them into some prior image you have of them. The same goes for understanding God. If you live in the visual world, you end up believing in many different gods and having statues of them. But if you start hearing on the inside, you realize there's one invisible God beyond the different visible forces operating in nature. So the Torah, in many ways, is auditory based. It's hearing based. It's not seeing based. We never saw God. We only heard his voice. We're given a text. We're not given a picture. The Torah itself is called shmu'ah, something that you hear. And when you read the Gemara, the Talmud, when people study the Gemara, how do they know what they know from the Torah? They heard it from the Rav, who heard it from his Rav, who heard it from his Rav. And ultimately, we heard it all from God. So each piece of Torah is also called the Shmu'ah, something you hear. And they refer to they address one another with the words, come and hear. I want to tell you something new about the Torah, a new idea, a new opinion. So come and hear it. Ta shma. Come and hear it. So it's a very, very, and that's why people have a hard time sometimes with Judaism, is that it's not so visual. So of course there are many beautiful synagogues and in history, and there's Jewish arts, but because of the very strong prohibition to make a painting, an image of God, and the iconoclastic nature of Judaism. Iconoclastic means to break the icons. The icons are the visual images of different idols. Then Judaism is very much seeing based. It's textual, and it mostly has to do with a library of many, many books, right? And I have a lot of books you can't see. And every Jewish home, the first thing you see is a lot of books. And when I remember starting to discover the religious world, then if you go to a regular modern secular home, the main thing you see in the living room is a TV, is a big TV set, right? It's the main thing. It's in the center. Everyone's around it. And that's what you do in the evening. Because of course there are libraries with books and everything, but the main thing you see in the living room is a TV. But then you go into a religious, a frum home, and one of the first things that strikes you is there's no television. The whole thing is organized in a different way. What you do see are massive libraries, and it doesn't matter which house it is, if it's a house of great Talmidei Chachamim, or people who aren't so big Talmidei Chachamim, everyone is going to have a very significant library of books, and you're not going to see a TV set, especially not in the center of the living room. Maybe you'll see something in one of the side rooms. So this explains the movement or the transition, the progression from the month of Tammuz to the month of Av, and it explains the connection between the world of idolatry and vision. But vision in a negative sense only, because so far we have vision in a negative sense, and we have hearing in a positive sense. Now, there was a very interesting non-frum, non-Dati Jew who lived in California, died a few years ago, and his name was Schlein. I forget his first name now, and he wasn't religious. I don't think he ever encountered Judaism in a significant way. He was a very interesting person. And he wrote a couple of very interesting books. And one of them, he called it The Alphabet versus the Goddess. And in this book, he talks about this process. And he said that even within the world of idolatry, in Greece and in other places, there was this stages. The first stage was you had a very, very, all the temples were dedicated to female goddesses. And he said they were more visual than the later temples. And then they were replaced by male deities, male gods, Zeus and Poseidon and all this. And he says, really, this was the first step in what he called the alphabet taking over the goddess. Sorry. So the goddess stands here for the very, very visual early idolatry stage, which he said again is more visual than the later stage, and had to do with female deities. It was replaced by a male god, which was really just the first step in a process of letting go of the visual aspect in general and replacing it by the alphabet. And he talks about the Jewish world of the Torah and the text, like I said, and also in Greece, the philosophical world, which was also the philosophers. We have to know this. The philosophers didn't like the idol practices so much, at least, especially not the major ones like Plato and Aristotle. Plato was very much against the world of idolatry. What he thought he distracted people from being spiritual lovers of wisdom, philosophers. So he calls it the alphabet versus the goddess. And he says, then he says it was a very negative thing. And now we have to go back, because he says he was a brain surgeon and he explored the different hemispheres of the brain. So he said the right hemisphere, he's more visual, and the left hemisphere is more alphabetical or linguistic, and linguistic has to do with hearing. And he said we put too much emphasis, we let go of the right hemisphere and we put too much emphasis on the left hemisphere, both Judaism and the Greek culture and the philosophical culture. And now we have to go back. We have to revive the goddess, revive the visual world, revive the right hemisphere. That was what he said, basically. Now, it's a very interesting idea, but and something strikes you immediately as very true, but it also has a lot of problems. And also, we can now see that basically what he wanted is coming to being, right? Ever since the invention of television and visual culture. As I said, radio was left far behind. There's this popular song called "Video Killed the Radio Star," and it talks of lamenting the transition from radio to video as the primary sort of focal point of culture. So it really, what he wanted happened, but it doesn't appear that it's elevating our culture. It appears to make our culture far more shallow and superficial, and everything is very very quick and very rapid and there's also something very interesting about seeing versus hearing. Seeing is very fast. You see an image, you see it all together, it's instantaneous. You see an image and it tells you a lot of things in one instant. And a visual image, a visual culture is very fast. Everything moves very fast because one image replaces another image. But a culture of hearing, a culture of text, is much slower. It's cooler. It's not as warm. It's not as rapid. It's more cerebral, less emotional. So he was very cerebral. He was a very intellectual guy. But he thought we went too much left hemisphere, too much text, too much hearing, and he wanted to go back to seeing. And now that it's happening, you have to say, well, I'm not sure that's what you wanted, Dr. Schlein, and when you wrote your book, because the world is becoming... People can't read your book now because it's so visual, like you wanted. Like you said, you wanted a visual word, you got a visual word. Now nobody can read your book because they're impatient. They need a 5-minute YouTube video to summarize it. They can't read it. So we need to make sense of this. And also we said that if we're not looking at the months, we're looking at the parashot, we see something else. We see that we start with hearing in the previous parsha, and now we're advancing towards seeing. And also, if you look, if you open the Chassidut on this parasha, it talks very highly about seeing. That there's a very high kind of seeing, a very positive kind of seeing. That seeing is greater than hearing. That seeing is deeper than hearing. That's very much like he said. He longed for the sense of eyesight to become predominant again. And you see this also. The sense of seeing is higher. And also, when you look at how Kabbalah explains the right and the left hemispheres, you see also something very interesting. He said that the right hemisphere, which has to do with eyesight, is feminine, and the left hemisphere, which has to do with hearing, is masculine. But in Kabbalah, it's the exact opposite. In Kabbalah, the right hemisphere, which indeed has to do with seeing, is masculine, and the left hemisphere, which has to do with hearing, is feminine. So now it's all very confusing. So in order to understand this, we need to realize that really there are 2 levels of seeing and 2 levels of hearing. And this only makes sense when you create a ladder. And the ladder goes like this. The ladder, we're going to climb the ladder now. It's four levels in the ladder, which takes you from the lower senses to the higher senses. And it goes like this. So the lowest rung, the lowest level of the ladder, is the very external, superficial kind of seeing, which is captivated by the outside of things. And really, you end up being very materialistic or very superficial. If you're staying on this level, this is the kind of visual culture that idolatry had, that is now coming back in a culture that puts in the center the TV screen or the movie screen or the Netflix series and so on. And when you're staying on this level, you're becoming very, very superficial, and you only think about how things appear and seem and so on. And you really have no time or leisure to think deeply upon things and to think about their inner meaning, because in order to do so, you have to close your eyes a little bit, right? When we say Shema Yisrael, Hear, O Israel, we don't just close our eyes, we put our hand on our eyes, which is a kind of double kind of screening, of not looking at the outside world, because the world is deceiving us. And if we want to go beyond this world, we have to move up from the lower kind of seeing to hearing. So this is the second rung. The second level of the ladder is moving up from seeing the outside of things, the material world, to hearing the inner aspect of things, or the spiritual world, to hear the souls within the bodies, to hear the presence of the one God beyond the many forces that we see operating in nature, to hear the inner meaning, the deeper meaning or meanings of something beyond its literal meaning, which is what Torah is all about. If the Torah appears to say one thing, it appears to be very simple, but then as you study, you realize there's more and more, it's many-fold meanings. Because when you're going to the level of hearing, you can hear things in different ways. It's different, it's not as objective or as solid as seeing. This is why the Torah is so multifaceted. And by the way, modern art, in a way, when you think about Cubism, which tries to look at things from a different direction, it's really trying to put the sense of hearing into the sense of seeing. Because you can't see something, seeing is instantaneous. You see something from one perspective. Moving from one perspective to another, it takes time, and that's more like hearing. So Cubism is like hearing nature, it's not seeing nature. And then it puts it back into the visual, into the painting. But, so anyway, again, so the first rung is seeing the outside, seeing the material world. Second level, which is the Torah, or what he called the alphabet versus the goddess, putting a text in the center, not an image, putting an invisible God, and creating a culture that has to do with learning and hearing and speaking and learning the Torah. This is the second level. But these are just the lower seeing and also the lower hearing. Even the hearing here, which is far higher than the seeing, is still not the higher kind of hearing. Now we're moving to the third level. Third level is the higher kind of hearing. The order is going to be lower seeing, lower hearing, upper seeing, right? It's a kind of mirror image. This is called chotam mitapech, which is like a stamp that you get a reverse image. So we have hearing at the edges. Seeing. On the lowest level of the letter is the negative kind of seeing, and on the highest level of the letters, there's a positive kind of seeing, and the middle two levels have to do with hearing, okay? So we started with seeing the outside world, which is associated with idolatry. We moved up, this is the re'eh, which tells you be careful of the seductive power of the visual culture of idolatry. And try and be in the hearing, hear the Torah, right? Like we told you in the previous Parsha, and like this month is telling you of, because it has to do with hearing. But then if you go deeper into the Torah, you have to hear it on another level. This is the third level. And very interestingly, the first level is just like Schlein said, it has to do with the feminine. The idolatry world is feminine in many ways. And when you see the way it seduced the Jewish people, and it's explained in Ezekiel and in Jeremiah, it was mostly the women tempted by this idolatry culture, because this visual culture captivated women. And even when Jeremiah the prophet was tortured by the Jewish people who didn't want to hear him, it was because he attacked the idol worships that the wives of those who tortured him used to practice. And their husbands were loyal to their wives, said, "You're making fun of what my wife believes in," and they tortured him. So the lower level is feminine, but in a negative kind of way, that it has to do with the women going for the Tammuz and the women going for these, of course the men also, but it was apparently the women led them on. And then you have the level of hearing, which is more masculine, because it was led by Moses. Moses was a masculine figure. The whole idea of the one God, monotheism, appeared to be something more masculine to the world of idolatry, just as Schlein says. But now we're going to the third level, the inner kind of hearing. This is again feminine. The inner kind of hearing, this is the higher feminine and the higher kind of hearing, which tells you if you want to hear the inner meaning of things, this is in Chassidut, it's called derher. Derher means just hearing, but it means inner hearing. It's hearing with your heart. It's hearing the deeper meaning of things. It's not the hearing of the revealed aspect of the Torah. When we spoke about the Torah as something that you hear, shmu'ah, and the sages addressing one another as tashma, come in here, this is all has to do with the revealed aspect of the Torah, the laws and the Talmudic debates around the laws and all this. This is the revealed level. But now that we're going to the third level, to the upper two levels, this is the hidden level of things. So this second kind of hearing is an inner hearing of the inner dimension of the Torah. This is far more feminine. It's hearing with your heart, right? In English, heart and hear are very close words. And if you take off the T, you get the word hear in heart. And hearing with your heart, der Her, is another kind of hearing. It's different. And this is called lehavin davar mitoch davar, to understand something out of something else. I first understood something. Understanding bina has to do with hearing. So I understand one thing, but if I want to understand the deeper meaning of it, I have to understand something out of something. I have to take out the inner level of it. So the fact we have two levels of hearing tells us it's not just moving away from the visual culture into the hearing text-based culture. It's within the text-based culture, you have to go deeper and deeper. You hear the outside, and then you have to hear the inside, and then you have to hear more on the inside, right? Because you have two kinds of hearing. It creates a kind of spectrum of hearing. It creates a hierarchy of hearing more and more on the inside. So this is the higher kind of hearing. Let me just share the screen. This will really help. I didn't share the screen. Let me do this now. Right, so can you see this now? We see the lower seeing, on the first level. It has to do with the material world. And then we had the lower hearing, which has to do with understanding the spiritual world, or realizing there's something deeper going on and there's one God and so on. We can also put polytheism next to lower seeing and monotheism next to lower hearing. But then if you want to go deeper into the Torah, into monotheism, you have to go up to the higher hearing, which has to do with Bina. Bina is the left hemisphere. And this is, just like Schlein said, it has to do with hearing. But unlike what he said, it's more feminine, not more masculine. As Kabbalah says, that the left hemisphere is more masculine. But then there's the fourth and final and highest level, which is the level of higher seeing. So higher seeing means that as you go deeper and deeper into the hearing aspect, you hear the outside, then you hear the inside, you hear the deeper meaning of something, and you go further and further into hearing more on the inside. Ultimately, the goal, what you want to get to, is a moment in which suddenly you don't just hear the meaning of something, right? You actually see it, because seeing is more powerful than hearing. Hearing is something distant and goes into your ear. But seeing is when you go out of yourself. It's not the sound or the word or the meaning going into your ear. It's you coming out of yourself and falling, so to speak, into a picture, into a vision. And this is like, I see what you mean. And when you see, and you read, for example, the Zohar, which is the main book of Kabbalah, they don't address one another in come hear what I have to tell you. They address one another saying, come see, I want to show you something. Of course, there are no pictures in the Zohar. It's not actual visual culture. It's an inner visual culture. The higher seeing is the farthest possible from the lower seeing. Right? The two levels of hearing are adjacent. They're one next to each other. But the higher seeing is very far away from the lower seeing. You had to really develop the faculty of hearing, of learning texts and learning ideas, and then you get to a totally different kind of seeing, spiritual seeing the essence of something, seeing the meaning of something so powerfully that it's what's the word? It's muchashi. You can actually sense it and feel it as if it's directly just in front of your eyes. And And this has to do, of course, with the right hemisphere, just like he said, but it's actually more masculine. Now, of course, what we want to get to is not that the kind that Chokhmah is above Bina. What we want to get to is this. We want to get to Chokhmah and Bina being next to each other, just like the two hemispheres. So really, we want to have the higher hearing and the higher seeing going together, just like two hemispheres. You want to have them both together and working together, and you hear the inner meaning of something, and then you can also see it. And after you see it, you go back to hearing it because you want to understand it more. And there's cross-fertilization going beyond the two. So what we have as a ladder are the lowest two rungs. We start with the outside world tempting us. Re'eh, look at all these idols. Don't follow them. You have to break their altars and break their temples because they're going to lie to you. They're going to deceive you and to tell you that the world is just material. So you have to learn a lot of Torah. That's going up to hearing. But as you go further up, further into the Torah, you reach a state in which you activate both masculine right hemisphere seeing, but not physical seeing with your eyes. It's spiritual seeing with the eyes of your head, the eyes of your heart, and also hearing the inner meaning of things. And they work totally together. So this is a very, very significant letter. And this is really ultimately, when we move on the level of parashot from Vaya Ekev Tishmeun to Re'eh of this parasha, it's really telling us, the Torah is really telling us two things simultaneously. It tells us, stay away, steer clear, watch out for the visual, hyper-visual, externally visual culture of idolatry, and go into hearing and deeper into hearing. But ultimately, if you really want to rectify the world of idolatry and to rectify the sense of eyesight, you have to have something as powerful as idolatry, but on a far higher level. You need to actually see the ideas of the Torah, which is really what we had standing at the footsteps, or the foothills, how do you say it, at the bottom of Mount Sinai, and the giving of the Torah happened, and it says, "V'kol ha'am ro'im et hakolot." They could see the voices, see the sounds. It was sounds coming from. They couldn't see God. They couldn't see Moses. They didn't see any miracle. It was just hearing voices, but they saw the voices. They didn't just hear the voices. And the level of seeing the voices, which is also goes together with hearing the lights. Once you have the two levels of higher seeing and higher hearing working together, then you see the sounds and you hear the lights. Because again, seeing is perceiving in a very direct way that's almost instinctive and intuitive. It's, now I see what you mean. I don't need to explain to me. There's a story that the Ari once napped. The Arizal, the greatest Kabbalist, he once took a nap, and as he woke up, he says, "Wow, I just realized amazing things that I was shown in the higher realms." And his students told him, "Please tell us what you saw." And he said, "It's going to take me 80 years to tell you what I saw." Because when you see something, it's instantaneous. You can see 80 years worth of textual auditory explanation in one instant. And we can't be like the Arizal, of course, but we need to aspire to be a little bit like the Arizal. That what we learn in a kind of hearing way, when we study the Torah, we need to reach a point, and this is the blessing of this parsha. He tells you, watch out for the negative visual culture, but I'm also blessing you to have the higher kind of seeing, right? Re'eh, see. I'm giving you the power of eyesight to merit, to have this experience of not just hearing the Torah, but also seeing in your mind's eye, seeing what the Torah is all about, the ideas, the different things we're studying, everything you're studying. You need to not just hear it, you need to hear it on the inside, have a deeper kind of hearing. And if you work hard on hearing, you're going to reach this higher kind of seeing, which is really the rectification. Because why is it the rectification of idolatry and of visual culture and Netflix and all this is because it's as captivating and powerful in the way it affects you. It's the substitute to Netflix and to movies is when the Torah becomes so concrete. That's the word I was looking for before. It becomes so concrete and so alive for you that it's just like a kind of movie. Of course, it's not a visual movie. It's not going to give you the rush, the adrenaline rush of the lower visual culture. It's far more subtle. You had to refine yourself. The refining is leaving the visual culture in favor of the hearing text-based culture, and then going deeper into that text-based culture, and that means refining your attraction to the visual culture. And if you do this, you get to experience the visual aspect of the Torah. Just like Rabbi Shimon in the Zohar says, come see, come into my Zohar book. I want to show you. It's not just letting you hear something. I want to show you visions, Torah visions, deep divine visions that would wrap themselves around you and would pull you into this vision of the world that you don't get from a regular, more rational kind of hearing. So this, I think, is a beautiful idea to take with us, in our lives, that we have lower seeing, hearing, higher hearing, and then higher seeing. Or we can just say seeing, hearing, higher seeing. We don't need to use the word lower at all even, because there's the external seeing, and then you say, I don't want to live in this kind of shallow, superficial visual culture. I want to be a book person, not a movie person, because they go deeper into things. Whatever they do, it's deeper. If you just see the 5-minute video, it's not like reading the book. So I want to be a book person, and not just a book. I want to go for the book of books. And going deeper into that, you want to hear the deeper meaning of it. That's more feminine again. It's feminine because it listens to the inner meaning of things. And then you want to get to another different kind of masculine way of perceiving things, which is seeing in your mind's eye everything you learned during the 2 levels, which is really a spectrum, as we said, of hearing and hearing more and more on the inside, is you want to get to the point you can see it. And then there's this really amazing cross-fertilization going on between what you saw, even for just one instant, it's enough, and what you learn and hear and think about more rationally, and they go together just like a happy wedding of a man and a woman within you. So that was our meditation, our shiur for today. And as I said, it's dedicated to the very wonderful, amazing teacher we lost this week, but fortunately we have a lot of books and also videos of him, so we can both hear him and see him, and hear him through reading and hear him through actual hearing, and seeing also his body language, which was very, very beautiful. A combination of something very brazen and open, but also very shy, and it's an amazing combination of qualities that he had. He was very cheeky. He would annoy people. He would insult people in the most positive way imaginable. He would insult them in a way of to stop wasting your time. Basically, what he said to everyone. On the other hand, you can see that he was very shy, very pnimi, very connected to his inside of things. And what he really wanted to awake people to is to be close to their own heart, and not to be a couch potato. He kept saying, people, don't be a potato. The worst thing in the world is to be a potato. And today we use the word potato. Someone who watches TV all day, right? They're a couch potato. And that's what he said, connecting this to our class today. Don't be a couch potato slouching before television. Be a book person. I translated all the Talmud to both Hebrew and English and Kabbalah and everything. You can get a lot of books for you to read them and go deeper into them. And then you'll get to connect to the ultimate Torah, inner, spiritual, divine visual culture, which is the Torah visions of what the world is really on the inside. And that's the best movie there is. It's the best TV series there is. And may we all merit to have this. So thank you once again.